Okay, so we'll begin with the second part of the workshop, which is how to apply RAIN in the moment of anxiety. And just remember that RAIN stands for recognize, accept, investigate, and non-dual nature, which is the way that Tara Brach uses it, but I'm using nature of mind, which I think is a little, they mean much the same thing. I just think that non-duality is a little bit abstract. It's more abstract anyway than the idea of fundamental goodness for me. Okay, so in the moment of anxiety, so we've done all this prep, right? We've done our journaling, we've identified the core belief that is feeding the negative thoughts that we're having when we panic, when we have anxiety, when we have stress, when we have anger, etc. We've identified the core belief. We've identified the negative thought patterns. So they are patterns of anxiety, they're patterns of fear, they're patterns of anger, whatever. We've identified what they are, and we've gone so far as to identify the actual thoughts themselves. So, you know, like if you have the thought, I'm totally unworthy, you would note that down, that that's a thought you have when you're having an anxiety attack. Or if the thought is, I'm going to have a complete panic attack here and humiliate myself, you would jot that down. That's the thought that you're having in the moment of anxiety and stress. So in your prep moment, you've recognized the core belief, you've recognized the negative thought patterns that they're basically about stress or fear or anxiety, and you've also identified some specific thoughts that you have, such as, I'm going to freak out. And something that a lot of people have is they think that they're going to lose their mind, that they will fall prey to the anxiety or the panic or the fear and never come back from that. Now, that idea is based on the idea that these states can be permanent. We know already that these states cannot be permanent. Nothing in the universe is permanent. Everything in the universe is impermanent. So that idea, I'm never going to come back from this, is based on a misperception of the nature of the reality of the universe, on the nature of the mind itself, and on the nature of the thought patterns and the mind states, the feelings. Okay, so they all pass. All right, so in the moment, this process is slightly different. So when you start to feel whatever you're feeling, anger, stress, whatever it is, you sort of look at it, be aware of it, and you recognize, I'm feeling anxiety, I'm feeling stress, I'm feeling anger. You recognize that those things come and go, that they're like waves, that they rise, they peak, and then they diminish, okay? You also recognize all the physical symptoms that you're having in the moment, how your body feels. So you're recognizing the full state you're in, the full mind state, the thoughts you're having, the feelings you're having, and the physical sensations that are going on. So if you've got sweaty palms, just go, okay. You don't need to do it verbally, you just, recognize, be aware of the sweaty palms, recognize, be aware of some unsettled nature of the tummy, recognize, be aware that your heart is racing, recognize, be aware that you're dizzy, recognize, be aware that you feel unsteady on your feet, recognize, be aware that your eyesight is blurry, whatever these are all that your fingers are tingling, that your toes are tingling, that your skin is crawling, whatever it is, the fight or flight response can do profoundly intense and unpleasant things to one's body. Okay, so recognize the sensations, recognize the thoughts that you're having. And it's a good idea to also recognize the trigger. So 99% of anxiety, panic, and stress is what I call anticipatory. It's in anticipation. It's anticipation of something awful happening because you've got that negative thought arising from that core belief. So it's usually anticipatory. So there's not actually, it's not actually in response to a real thing. It's, I'm going to freak out, or I'm going to have a heart attack. I am going to humiliate myself. I am not going to get this work done. It's anticipatory. It's rooted in the future. And it's fed by our memories of past states that we've had before. Okay? But we know now that every time we've had that state, it's passed and the worst has not happened. So we use that as evidence, okay, in our journaling. So you recognize everything that's going on for you. You be in the moment of your anxiety, your panic, your anger, your stress, okay? And then the next step is acceptance. And what I did was I just said this. I accept that I feel this way. I consent to feel this way. For me, saying consent takes it a step further. Accepting it means that you have no choice. Consent means that you choose this state that you're in. And why do we do this? 2 reasons. Number 1, refusing to accept how you're actually feeling makes it worse. Resisting how you're feeling makes it worse. Fleeing from what you're feeling might be a short-term fix, but in the long term, makes it worse. The panic will be worse, the anxiety will be worse, the anger will be worse. So saying, I consent to feel this way is actually quite powerful. So we do that because, number 1, not to do so makes it worse. And this is the second reason why. We want to use it as future evidence. We want to go, I consent to feel this anxiety because it will pass. And then I will be able to see this state's impermanent. I will learn that I can cope with this. This is not going to kill me, humiliate me, destroy me. So we consent to feel it because it's a teaching moment. We will use this as evidence in the future that we will come through it. There will be a moment of relief once it passes. It's a good idea to rest in that moment of relief, by the way. We can then use it as evidence. This is another time I had that thought, I had that feeling, I had that physical sensation. I thought the worst was going to happen, but it didn't. This is more evidence that this is a temporary state, that you don't have to be controlled by it. Okay, so you consent to using it as a learning moment, but also if you don't consent, if you don't accept, it will be worse. It'll be much worse. Now, usually when we're doing that recognition process, okay, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stressed, just the awareness thing, because when we watch, when we're just aware, and it can be a kind of a non-verbal awareness of our state, our mental state, our physical state, it can actually diminish the experience already. It can sort of drop it down, maybe even destroy it, just by recognizing how you're feeling and being in the moment. Because if you're in the moment of your experience, you're not thinking about the past and you're not thinking about the future. And remember how I said most anxiety, panic, and stress is anticipatory. You're anticipating something in the future. And if you just stay in the moment of your experience, that anticipation can become weaker. Now, many people, however, will need to continue to the next step, which is to accept. I accept that I feel this way. I consent to feel this way. For some people, that then is enough to completely undo the experience. The panic will subside, the anxiety will subside, the anger will subside, the fear will subside, okay? Because you're just consenting, you're accepting, it'll go away. I do find, however, that people who've had long-term stress patterns, anger patterns, anxiety patterns, they often need to go on to the investigate. And this investigate thing, right? We've done the journaling about this in our prep. So we know we've already got all the evidence so that in the moment we can remind ourselves, okay, why am I feeling this way? Oh, okay, I've got anticipated anxiety because I'm going to a meeting. I'm stressed about that. I don't want to humiliate myself. What's the likelihood that I'm going to humiliate myself? Unlikely. It's never happened before. Stuff like that. So what's the worst could happen? Is the worst likely? And even if the worst does happen, so what? But use all your evidence here. You know, for an example, someone I know who did this work before, their primary source of anxiety, well, they had core belief that turned into negative thinking patterns that turned into anxiety that produced all these physical symptoms. And then the physical symptoms made them think, I'm going to have a heart attack. And so then all their anxiety attacks thereafter were about, I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm going to have a heart attack. So it really masks actually what's underneath the negative thinking pattern and the core belief. But when that person was having that, oh, I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm going to have a heart attack, in the moment when she was doing RAIN, she applied evidence at this investigate point. What's the evidence that I'm going to have a heart attack? There was none. She'd had 4 cardiac stress tests. She'd had this experience every day for years, ever since something traumatic happened to her. And it had never been a heart attack. So she was able to use the evidence in that way to undermine it in the moment. And because she'd done the prep, it was stronger. She already knew what the evidence was. She could call it up, okay? So that's why the prep's important. And then it's also good at this point to give your experience some kind of, you can do it at the recognize point, or you can do it at the investigate point, to give it some kind of score, as it were. So, if your stress is like at a level 10, you give it a 10. If it's really weak, you give it a 1, right? And it's very rare to have experiences that are like 8, 9, and 10. Most of them are around the 5, 6, 7 point. After you've been doing this process for a while, as soon as you've done recognize, and you get to invest, and then you've done the acceptance, and you get to investigate, by the time you get to this point, it's usually dropped down to a 3 or a 4, and you can go, oh, I've dealt with 9. I can deal with a 3. So it's actually comforting. So give it a ranking, and then do all this stuff. Why am I feeling this way? How intense is it? What's the worst that could happen? Is the worst likely? What's the evidence that this is not going to happen? What's the evidence that my thinking patterns are incorrect? So you apply all of that stuff there, and because you've done your planning, it will really work in the moment. Then you get to non-dual nature or nature of mind, and then again, you just place your awareness on the emotion and rest in the non-dual nature of awareness. Okay, so this is what I was talking about before when I mentioned that the thoughts and feelings and emotions are waves, and the true nature of mind is the deep ocean, calm, clear, still. Okay, so when you're doing this part of it, the nature of mind part or non-dual nature part, it's good to summon that idea of fundamental goodness and summon a memory that you have. Because remember when I said the nature of mind has only like a couple of qualities: bliss or joy and compassion or love. Okay, those are the only things fundamental to your being. So when you get to the end, usually by the point investigate happens, the anxiety is already ebbing away. It's very interesting. Panic's already ebbing away. But go to non-dual, because actually, in the end, it'll be fun. And in the end, I got to a point where the minute something anxious happened, or I had an anxious thought or an obsessive thought or something like that, I got to the point where it's like, oh, goody. I get to rest in nature. I get to rest in the nature. It was exciting to me. I thought it started to feel happy, which is quite odd when an anxious feeling arose, because I thought, oh, I get to practice with this and I get to rest in the nature. So it became, this is further down the track. It's not at the beginning, certainly not in the middle, but towards the end, when you're getting to the point where you're really starting to conquer your anxiety and panic and stress, you get to the point where you sort of go, ooh, I'm feeling a little bit anxious. Yay, I can rest in the nature. So it does become your friend, this stuff. Anxiety becomes your friend, stress becomes your friend, panic becomes your friend, because it triggers a desire to meditate, to rest in the nature of mind, and actually gives you the opportunity to do it in a way that's powerful. When you're just sitting in a normal sense, that's really great and good. But when you're working on these kinds of negative emotions, this is quite powerful. And the meditation you get, even though it might be fleeting, it actually is quite profound. So place your awareness on the emotion, summon this. So you've done your prep, the emotions are of the same nature, the same taste, we sometimes say in Buddhism, as the fundamental goodness, which is the true nature of mind or the Buddha nature. They rise from that place, so they're of the same nature, which means underneath them, there's joy and compassion. Actually, not even underneath. They are joy and compassion. It's just our dualistic mindset that is obscuring their true nature. Okay? So you summon that idea, and then you summon a memory. You do this in your prepping. I probably should have told you this before. In your prepping, think of a moment in your life when you felt real joy or bliss. If you're a meditator, you might have had moments of bliss in meditation. You can think or remember the most profound bliss you've ever had in meditation. But it can be, something for me that was very joyful is walking in rainforests. I really love rainforests. I love walking in rainforests. I love to be alone in the dark cool of it, you know, and I feel very joyful in that moment. Other people like to sit on a beach, to look at the sky, to walk in a park, whatever it is, or, you know, a celebration of some kind, you know, anything that made you feel really happy and joyful. For an anxious person and a panicked person, that might be hard to find that memory, but there is one at the very least. It's a little bit like Harry Potter trying to summon a Patronus. He had to think of a happy memory and he didn't really have many. When you're an anxious person, it's hard to summon the Patronus, but there is always one memory that gives you enough fuel. Okay, so summon that memory of that joyful moment, that moment where you felt great love or joy. Either will be fine, or both is good. And then allow the sensations, the physical sensations of that, to rise in your body, and really place your awareness or rest in those physical sensations. So it's kind of like dropping out of the mind and into the body, and in the sensations of joy, happiness, bliss. Okay, so you do this in your prep. You think of this memory, you jot down what the memory is, you summon it, you allow the feeling to increase, you make it a physical, you allow it to become a physical experience, and then you kind of just rest in that physical experience of joy, happiness, or bliss, okay, or love, whatever you want to call it. So then when you're doing this in the moment of anxiety, and you get to this point, the N, the non-dual, the nature of mind, you summon that experience of joy and happiness, and you understand this is what my fundamental nature is. It's joy, it's compassion, it's love, it's bliss. Okay, this is what your fundamental nature is. And also, this is the fundamental nature of the emotion, of the thought, of the feeling. So you go, okay, I'm going to place my awareness on the emotion, and I'm going to drop into its fundamental nature, which is that feeling of joy and bliss. And at first, this is a bit contrived, you know, so you kind of like, you have to kind of bring up that memory, and you have to then allow it to sort of increase, and you're saying to yourself, the emotion is fundamentally good. The emotion is fundamentally nothing more than bliss. Whatever you want to say, you can use your own words. You know, in its nature, all emotions are fundamentally joy, right? Whatever sort of little phrase you want to use, probably come up with that and stick to the same one. And you're sort of saying that to yourself, and you're summoning that feeling, and you're going, okay, this emotion is this feeling. This emotion is this feeling. And it's all a bit contrived and a bit sort of worked up, you know? But in time, right, when you look at the thought or the feeling, the anxiety, the stress or anger, that feeling will just rise of its own, because as soon as you place your awareness on it, you know that's what's behind. And the quality of that, right? At first it's worked up. You're creating it. It's a memory. It's a feeling from a memory. But then there'll be a moment where actually it shifts, and you're actually not producing it anymore. You just look at the thought, look at the feeling, and that joy or bliss emerges, and it'll be different to the one you were contriving. The real one will show, okay, and it will be not. This is a little abstract, but it will not be rooted in the memory. It will actually not have any reference. It'll just be fundamental. It won't depend on anything, because that's your nature showing through. Okay, so we want to get to the point where we think every thought, every emotion, everything that happens gives me an opportunity, even no matter how negative it is, gives me an opportunity to rest in the nature, because the intensity of the experience means that it's going to be fuel to get you to drop into the nature in a way that, you know, when you're just sort of sitting around calm in your meditation, it might not have that fuel at first. Okay, I actually think doing this is actually quite a strong way to recognize who we really are. Meditation is brilliant. Everyone should meditate every single day for at least a half an hour. You know, that should be our goal in the long term. But this is a gift if you have anxiety or panic or stress, because it's a strong way to get there. Okay. And, you know, for me, like I had profound anxiety, profound panic, you know, obsessive compulsive disorder that really disabled me. To be free of those things is rather amazing. And it's like, it really changes you to know that you have worked this out yourself and that your nature was the cure. It's really kind of quite profoundly, it gives you what we call Vajra confidence, which means an adamantine or a diamond-like indestructible confidence, not in ordinary things, not in the ordinary ego or the ordinary mind, but in that fundamental goodness. It really gives you a strong confidence of that, and your aspect and behavior and your perception is different. It's subtly different at first and then more profoundly different as we go along. You know, I had a bit of a bad day the other day, not in terms of anxiety and stuff like that, because I don't have anxiety anymore, but I was physically unwell. I had quite a lot of pain, and normally before I had conquered my anxiety and panic, that physical pain would trigger anxiety and then panic, right? But it was very interesting to me to be in a state of pain, and I hadn't been in a state of pain like that for a while because I'm sort of managing my pain quite well at the moment. I have chronic pain, for those who don't know. I've been managing my pain quite well. This was a bad day. It sort of emerged. It was quite unpleasant, but I noticed straight away there was no anxiety, there was no panic, there was no negative thought pattern. There was just pain. And if you know anything about pain, anxiety and panic and negative thinking, it makes it so much worse. It actually intensifies it. So to not have that, it meant that, you know, I coped with that pain quite well and did the things I needed to do to deal with it. And, you know, it did not become this massive thing where you're awfulizing everything. Oh my God, this is so awful. That didn't happen. So I was really interested to see that happen. So then, you know, you get more and more experiences in your life where things that used to trigger your panic, your anxiety, your stress, your anger, whatever it is, they no longer are triggers, and you sort of go, oh, isn't that interesting? This was never the reason for the anxiety, actually, because now it isn't a reason for it. The reason for the anxiety is not the trigger, it's the core belief underneath. It's not the memory, it's not any of that. It's the belief systems we have underneath and the negative thinking patterns that come up. And the great and liberating thing about that is that actually we can change what we believe. We know this, and we can change the way we think. We know this. This is a fact. And that's the liberating thing about anxiety. Depression's a bit different, but anxiety, stress, panic, these things we can get on top of. These things we can change. Okay. I will pause for a minute and then give you an opportunity to ask any questions if you like. And then we can wind this up, I think. Okay. Any questions or comments or anything you'd like to share at this point?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
One thing that I have found quite useful also in sort of moments of anxiety has been going back to the breath. Just actually finding that if I can recognize even that I'm breathing, then I have a bit more control over sort of regulating it, because often, you know, when you're in an anxious state, your breathing changes. It's sort of one of the things I notice with myself. And also being able to then pause, so find a pause, which can sort of, when you're triggered, I know for me, it sort of takes you out of that anxiety that seems to be surrounding you.
Yeah. So the thing about breathing, which is why we meditate, you know, to place our attention on the breath, is that when we place, it's like the same with thoughts and emotions. When you place your awareness on them, they change. It's a very interesting thing. So when you place your awareness on your breath, or as you said, return to the breath, the breath naturally, and this is quite interesting, it naturally slows and naturally deepens. You don't have to do anything. Just placing the awareness on it will do that.
Yeah.
People with anxiety do hyperventilate. That's a known thing, and that hyperventilation state actually increases the physical sensations you have. So it will mean that you get quite a kind of like increased physical sense of what's going on. So there's more dizziness, there's more sweating, there's more of that kind of stuff, and there's more pins and needles. So to place one's awareness on the breath is a very good thing, and when you're and that happens in the recognize part. So when I was talking about it doesn't need to be a verbal recognition. You just sit in the nature of where you're at. That is what you're kind of saying. You're returning to the breath. So that's a good strategy. Some people, they can't focus on the breath when they're anxious because it makes their anxiety worse. So it depends on who you are and how you approach it. So for you, that works. For other people, it might not work. And so for people that it doesn't work, then I would suggest to just sit in the nature of their experience and recognize what's going on. But then in time, that will be beneficial to go to the breath once they've actually started to get a bit more space around the whole thing. And they know that, because sometimes people, it's actually the breathing itself that is a trigger.
Yeah.
Or their heartbeat. I know some people who have their heartbeat itself is the trigger. So it's really a very individual thing. But yes, you're right. I find also dropping into the breath is a very quick way to turn off the hose, and you quite quickly kind of calm down. It's all very individual. Yeah, everyone does their own. Everyone will find their own way, I think. Thanks for that. That was really useful. Do you want to say anything else, or does anyone else want to add anything?
I was thinking of one thing
Go
when you
ahead.
were talking to us about finding an emotion, finding a memory and latching onto a memory that was very joyous. Someone I worked with once helped me, some of my anxiety, which is very intermittent, and I haven't had anxiety for a long time, but I had a short episode once, and I went and saw someone, and she helped me. It was about lack of control. So I was encouraged to find an experience where I had felt in complete control, and she dropped me into my body and asked me to think how I felt physically at that moment of complete control and confidence, and to recall that feeling in my body. So it wasn't a happy and joyous, and I can't remember the words you used. It wasn't a joyous experience. It was a feeling, a different feeling, but that has helped me. Is that?
Yep, that's good. So that is good. What I would say about that is that Vajra, what we call confidence in the Buddhist sense, or is actually better than control, because in the long run, we don't have a lot of actual control.
No, that's exactly what she said. We control so little in our life. It was about confidence in me and what I was doing.
But one of the things that we do have control over actually is our thinking. We can control that. There's very little control externally. There's very little control around our health. We can eat well, we can exercise, we can do what we can take medications. But sometimes things happen and we can't control them. And but in terms of the mind, that's where control is. But actually, and that's a good thing. And certainly, whatever you use to work, if it works, use it. That's I think always the advice. But the touching base with joy and happiness will bring confidence in that fundamental goodness, and that is equivalent, I would say, to that. Well, it's definitely equivalent to that sense of control that helps you to feel like you could get through your situation. But actually, it's not dependent on situation. It persists no matter what the situation is. it's hard to describe unless because initially you're summing up something that is also quite sort of dependent on conditions. Like a moment of happiness is obviously got causes and conditions that lead to it. But the joy that I'm talking about that eventually comes in place of that, you know how I said you're working it up, and then eventually just by looking at the thought or the feeling or the emotion, its actual true nature will show, because you've kind of trained yourself what to look for, how it feels. It's a little bit like, you know, you can't recognize
your work. And because I've done it with that other example, so I will.
Yeah. So I think that will bring, this new joy that is not worked up is not dependent on situation. It's your nature. So it's internal. It doesn't need causes and conditions. That seems contrary to everything else I said.
No, it's right.
It's not dependent on anything and will always just be there. And it comes with what we call Vajra confidence, which is that you are, you know, no negative anything. This wish for control has underneath it a belief in your inability to manage or cope. You know, but this joy tells you that's just a fantasy. That's just a delusion. You can cope. You are capable. That's what that joy tells you. And so that's a different way of dealing with it. I'm not saying don't do that. I think that's good. Definitely very good. Anything that works, works. But I think this as well, if you add this in, you will eventually hit a place where there's a joy there that means that you're at ease in every situation, no matter what the situation is. That's the long-term goal, if we could call it a goal. Okay, anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, no, I'm good.
Anything anyone else wants to say?
I found recognizing and investigating to be sort of very helpful, but I really struggle with the accepting and allowing myself to have those emotions and that intense anxiety. Yeah.
Usually accept is it's interesting that it's second, but that's because that otherwise it wouldn't have spelt out rain, you know. Because I have, when I've taught, and when I don't always do it in this format, the rain format. I've quite often done it in a different way. But when this idea of accepting the way that you feel comes up, whether we're using rain or anything else, it is the point of most resistance. And it is interesting that it happens in the second place in rain, because really it's the thing that most people struggle with. So that is quite normal. What I would say is, when we resist accepting how we're feeling, it's because we don't understand the logic of acceptance, right? So the logic is, without acceptance, it's worse. And number two, without accepting the feeling, the experience you're going through, you can't learn from it. So you're robbing yourself of two things: a better experience, because, you know, by not accepting you have a worse experience, and of the learning of the experience. Now, that said, when pain is a really good example, anxiety is really good, and pain are really good examples of things that are very hard to accept.
Yeah.
Physical pain is a bit like anxiety in that it actually pushes you out of your logical mind. It actually is so kind of all-consuming that it pushes you out of your logical mind. And anxiety is a bit like that too. It pushes you out of your logical mind, and you're kind of in a state of feeling. So that's why the prep stage is so important. So you need to kind of understand the reasons for acceptance in that prep stage, and then, you know, which is that without accepting it, it's going to be much worse. So it's really logical. And number two, without accepting it, you can't then use the experience itself as evidence that it's impermanent and passing and stuff. So it's really, really, you need to really, in the prep part, get your head around why acceptance is important. The other thing is, when you understand that in its nature, this anxiety is actually joy underneath, underneath your reactions, underneath your perception of the intensity, it's actually joy. So, for example, when you get to that point of the non-dual bit and you're looking at it and it does transform, not transform, but it does reveal itself as joy. If it was a little bit of anxiety, like a 4, it'll be a 4 in joy. If it was a huge amount of anxiety, like a 9, it'll be a 9 in joy. So this is interesting, So the intensity of the anxiety is just, the intense nature of the joy underneath. So, but our dualistic nature perceives it in a different way. The radiance of the mind, everything that happens, thoughts, feelings, these are the radiance, the dualistic things. You can determine how you experience them, and that's why acceptance is tricky, because you're not accepting that it's up to you how you experience them. There's still a sense of they're permanent, and this other bit that they're true. So you need to work on the idea that the anxiety is not true. It's real. You are feeling it, but it's not true. It's not true what the anxiety is telling you. The intensity is not an indication that it's true. The intensity is just an indication that the mind is amazing. That's it. But it's not true. So I think that it's easy to accept when we understand also the core belief underlying it. And that often is hard for people to locate it. Like, and often it'll be hidden. There'll be what I call like a capstone memory. So it didn't all happen at one time, but there will be one memory that kind of for us says everything about what that core belief is. Or we kind of sometimes think, oh, that's when it happened. But actually that memory is just when it kind of really solidified and became clear. But it's probably been building up over time. So you need to find the core belief and then locate the memory. And then when we understand this is the origin of these things, we can see its causes, we can see its conditions. We also know underneath there's just joy. Then we can accept it. The thing is, if acceptance is really, really hard, there's nothing wrong with working on the recognize and investigating and the non-dual part first.
Yes.
That's fine. But honestly, I found the most powerful thing to consent to the feeling. It's there anyway. By refusing it, it doesn't go away. It actually gets stronger.
Yeah. I want to. It's just, it's a struggle.
So we could chat about this separately, but if you feel comfortable, you could think about this. What is the fear of acceptance? So what do you think will happen if you accept? And how is that related to your negative thinking patterns and your core belief? You don't need to say what these things are here in this situation, but just ask yourself those questions. The fear of acceptance, how is that related to my negative thinking patterns? What do I think will happen to me that is negative? And how does that all relate back to my core belief that's fueling this stuff? Because what's happening there is...
That makes a lot of sense.
The fear of acceptance is tied in to what you think is going to happen when you have anxiety. Usually you'll think, I'm not trivializing in any way, and I'm not saying this is your thought pattern. I'm just giving an example. So often people will think, oh, if I accept this, my anxiety will get worse and I'll be lost in it and I'll be a crazy cat person for the rest of my life. That's what people think. But actually the reverse is true. If you accept, it's weaker. If you accept, you won't lose control. If you accept, it'll actually go away, which is contradictory and ironical to the idea of acceptance. we are accepting it as it is, right? We just accept it as it is. But ironically, that will mean it will go away. So it's a funny thing. You accept it as it is, even though it's intense, even though it's awful. You just accept it. But in the doing of that, it goes away. It weakens at least. So it's a very funny thing. So you need to, in the prep part, figure out what that fear of acceptance is about. And usually people, I'm not saying this is true for you, but usually people will find that their fear of acceptance is because one of their negative thought patterns is, I'm going to lose control. I'm going to be totally like this forever. It'll never go away. It'll get worse and worse, and I'll have a complete panic attack. So it usually means that people are thinking that if they accept, they'll have a panic attack. That it will have a full-blown anxiety attack. But the opposite is true. And this is why we prep, rather than trying to implement it in the moment of peak anxiety or peak panic, because it actually won't really work in the moment if we haven't prepped. So you need to understand that it's not going to become a full-blown anxiety attack. It's not going to become more unpleasant. It's not going to become worse. It's going to become better. So that's part of the prep process. So it's actually quite okay to not accept very well in the moment. That's fine. But in the prep part, we need to kind of get a handle on it.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Anytime you feel any kind of resistance to acceptance, you can just summon that feeling of joy and happiness and drop into that. Because rather than sort of like, you're resisting acceptance and then you're resisting resistance. So rather than doing that, just summon a moment of happiness and bliss or love and drop into that. Rest in that for a moment. Start again back at recognize. Does that make sense?
Yes, a lot.
And definitely journal. Journaling is good because then you can sort of see, you'll be able to unpack what the fear is about. And there's a lot of fear about it. As I said, most anxiety is anticipatory. It's fear of an anxiety attack, fear of anxiety itself. Same with stress and anger. It's fear of these things getting worse or becoming full-blown in a situation that will embarrass or humiliate us. It's a shame thing. So, but the thing is, when you're doing this at home in your prep space, you're safe. You are safe. So, and if you really struggle with it, just skip to non-dual, generate that sense of joy or bliss or happiness or love, drop into that, just rest in that. And then you don't need to go back that day, or you can go back and start again in your prep. I think that's the way to go through. For me, one of the things that was very helpful was when I recognized what my core belief was, I skipped this whole process. I just thought, but I've been meditating and in Dharma a long time. So, but you might be able to do this. I'm not saying you can't. So you could simply go, anxiety is bliss. Anxiety is fundamental nature of mind. I use the Tibetan words for that, but you could do any kind of words you like.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a Buddhist. And so when we say the true nature of anxiety is primordial bliss, right? If we say that seems a bit like there's a distance between the anxiety and the primordial bliss or the primordial nature, right? For me, I just dropped all of those things and I just said, anxiety is, the word I used was rigpa, which is the Tibetan word, which is the word for the deep nature of mind, right? So I just went, anxiety is rigpa, and embraced it and felt, when I have felt rigpa in my meditation, I summoned that. So I would just go, anxiety is rigpa, and it instantly would break it up. So, but if you haven't had that experience in meditation, then you can just get a facsimile of that, what that is, which is joy and happiness. So just go, anxiety is in its nature happiness. Anxiety is joy. Anxiety is perfect as it is. It's tricky because we think because we're in dualistic mind, we're in a dualistic state, we think that this negative experience is real, but it's an illusion. It's an illusion. So really recognizing that in its nature, it's something else. It's not what we think it is helpful. Anyway, find a way that it works for you. This is not a set process. You know, it's not like a course where you've got to go through A to Z in a set way. It's all about showing ingenuity with it. So figuring out how it works for you. And if you have trouble at a particular step, or if anyone else has trouble at a particular step, figure it out and find a way for it to work for you. I really think dropping into the nature of mind, if you can, resolves all problems. I really find that's true. So, but if you can't, so just dropping into its facsimile, which is an experience of happiness or joy, will also help. So you could do that. And the other thing is, if you have a regular meditation practice as well as this, which I was about to get to, now might be a good time to do that. It really helps support that whole process. Does anyone else want to say anything else at this point?
No.
Good. Okay, not good, but I'm cool to move on because we're running out of time. I'll just get you to mute your microphones if you don't mind for the last little bit. So, as I was just mentioning, it's a really good idea to do your prep with a journal. So we have a prompt questions which we shared earlier, like what are the core beliefs? What are the negative thought patterns? What is the worst case scenario that I think is going to happen? How likely is that? So you use these as prompt questions and you journal your way through the RAIN process as a prep, right? So you write it all down and reread that on a regular basis. You could, I think, as a good practice, reread it every day. Slightly less good practice would be to read it every week at least. Okay. The other thing I think it's really important is to set aside time for relaxation and meditation. So eventually these are the same thing. Meditation is relaxing into the nature, right? But initially, meditation requires awareness on something in order to still the mind. And relaxation is a slightly different process. You know, you want to relax your body through progressively relaxing the muscle systems in your body and also relaxing your mind, letting your mind just do nothing, relaxing your breathing, letting your breathing just deepen and slow naturally. So these are things that are kind of different. I would do the relaxation, before meditation almost every time. I think that's useful. Or you can use the relaxation. I have recorded the relaxation process we do in our meditation group. And I will make that available as part of this course material, this workshop materials. So you can listen to my annoying voice to relax if that helps you. But you can also record your own voice. You can find another voice on YouTube that works. You don't want to go marathon on this stuff. Meditation at first should not be a marathon. It should be a little and then slowly increase. Okay. And then something I've also suggested, choose a daily activity to apply mindfulness to. Mindfulness means just to be aware of what you're doing. So it can be like having a shower, it can be washing the dishes, it can be walking the dog, it can be washing your hair, it can be anything. Just choose one thing that you do each day that takes 5 to 10 minutes that you can be mindful of. Just let the mind be and just be aware of what you're doing. You can be listening to birds singing outside. It can be my Jamyang, I think all of you know who Jamyang is. He sits outside and he is mindful of the wind every day. So just mindful of the wind. It's easy to do, anything like that. And then cultivate joy each and every day. With joy, less is not more, and more is always better. So joy is the only thing that you can't have too much of. And you can get that in any way that suits you, in any way that you like. Joy is very individual. Whatever it is, even if it seems like a completely ordinary thing, even do it. Watching movies, eating ice cream, going for a walk, having a bath, sitting quietly in a park, going for a country drive, whatever it is, do it every day for at least, a little period of time, 15 to 20 minutes minimum. Good would be an hour, So whatever cultivates joy for you, do that every day. These are things that are strategies that support that process of working with anxiety and panic. They're healthy distractions in a way, but also they are profound in their own way. So it's really good to do these things. And then if you can, think of a happy time, a joyful moment. This is something you could do every day as a practice, which we call in Buddhism mudita, which means appreciative joy. You can think of a happy moment, think of a joyful time, and you can let that become a physical experience and let that physical experience increase, and then just rest in that strong physical experience of joy or happiness. And then you can say to yourself, may all beings know this joy. I rejoice in the joy that all beings feel. Whatever joy someone else feels, I rejoice in it, and I wish that they have more and more and more. So you rest in your own joy and you wish for all beings to have that experience, and you celebrate other beings who have that experience, who are lucky enough to have that experience. So, and also you can do this little thing when anyone experiences something good in their life and they tell you about it, drop into that moment of your own joy and really rejoice that that's what they have. Rejoice that that's where they are. It's really great, and it undercuts the social media thing of feeling envious of other people's experiences and feeling jealous and whatever. It undercuts that stuff. But mostly it just connects you to the nature of things. Your fundamental nature is a lot like that joy, that happiness. Stronger, not dependent on causes and conditions, but very like that. And it's suffused with compassion as well. So you can do that. You can just, walk outside, experience the breeze, experience sunlight, experience the sky, and just drop into joy, and then rejoice that other beings can feel this, and make the wish that other beings can feel this every day, preferably all day. That would be great. All right. So that is our workshop done and dusted for the day. Thank you very much for attending. Any last minute comments or questions or anything?
No, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I shall wind this up then, and may you have a blissful and happy rest of the day and week.
Oh, I do have a question.
Oh, go.
These slides, as soon
Yeah.
as you go away, these slides will go with you? Do we get these slides?
You do get these slides,
Okay.
as well as notes and some prompt questions that you can put into a journal.
Does that mean they'll be emailed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Either I'll email them to you,
Okay.
or they'll be made available longer term on the Jalu Meditation Centre website.
Great. Okay.
And I'll also send you the recordings as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. Thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate your time. And I am really pleased that you're taking steps to drop into joy. I think that's great.